guest will prove how we all completely manipulated by perception in just 30 seconds. Now, that's just down the alley of what we've been talking about here. And our guest is Anil Kumar. He's actually one of the leading professors in neuroscience. He's also behind numerous of experiments about perception. Now, Anil is also the author of the publishing sensation, which is called Being You, a New Science of Consciousness. So actually a Sunday Times bestseller. Anil, such a great pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hi, Martin. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I should just say my surname is Seth, not Kumar. That's my middle name, but that's quite
Oh my gosh, how can I say things like this? Everyone just make sure that you're not listening to my perception, because the reality is Anil. Right? You see, this is the perception.
Yeah, exactly. You had it. Right? You've been guided by your expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Already.
Listen, I just want to ask you one question here. What is perception and how does the brain do it?
Well, the second bit is very, very difficult to answer. We're still neuroscientists and psychologists still working on this very hard. But what is perception is itself a fascinating question, because I think most of us take it for granted, right? We wake up in the morning, we open our eyes, and the world just seems to pour itself into our mind transparently, as if there's nothing special going on. We just open ourselves to the world and there it is. You know, Alan was saying it's all about noticing things, training ourselves to notice what's going on. This is really hard because it doesn't seem like we have to. It seems like the world just presents itself to us. And in fact, a common way to study and think about perception is that the brain sort of reads out the world from sensory information that flows into the eyes, into the ears, through the skin when you touch things, and that there's like a little you, a mini me inside my skull, the self, that is the recipient of all this information, that is doing the perceiving. Now, a long tradition in philosophy and neuroscience, and the tradition that I'm working on too, turns that on its head. And it suggests that what we perceive doesn't come so much from the outside in, but from the inside out. And that the self isn't this thing that does the perceiving. The self is itself a kind of perception. What my work has been about is thinking of the brain as a kind of prediction machine. So it's always generating predictions about the causes of sensory signals. We don't have direct access to what sound is. Generating predictions about the causes of sensory signals and using sensory data to update them.
So tell me, Anil, how I was just interrupting you rudely just a couple of minutes ago, but tell me, how can we use this insight, this observation in the real world, in work environments, or just how we are as human beings?
I think it's fundamentally quite similar to what Alan was saying. It's firstly just the process of recognizing, of acknowledging that the way we perceive things is not necessarily the way they are. You know, it's not just given to us by the sensory information that comes into our eyes. It depends on the interpretations that our brains make of it. And where do these interpretations come from? If it's a basic sort of visual illusion effect, like the first thing there with the gray colored squares, you know, the brain just has that wiring built into its cortex, and there's very little we can do about it. The brain expects things to behave differently under shadows. But the other example is interesting because it shows how quickly our perceptions can change when we change our expectations, and our expectations are changing all the time. And actually, Ellen and I were talking just before the show that once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. And this shows that there's a sort of a one directionality to this. We have to be very careful to curate the kinds of expectations we have. So in everyday life, I think this is important. I walk around the world and I'm always just reminding myself that the way I see things, it doesn't mean that it's all made up, but it means that it's a kind of constructive dance of interpretation between the brain and the world. And the other important lesson, I think, is that other people might do it differently. Because the world that I see seems to be real in all its elements, it's very hard for me to understand that other people in the same situation might actually be having a different experience. And I think we're getting used to the idea now that of external diversity. We all differ in height and skin color and so on, but there's this hard to see because it's all private and subjective. There's just as much inner diversity as there is outer diversity. And when we recognize that, I think it will allow us to engage with people, understand them much better. And that can be useful in work, in life, and as Alan said, in our integrated work life experience.